Hello, friends. Welcome back to the universe and the garden. It's July 22nd. And here we are in the garden. As an introduction, the first thing I'll tell you is that this is a experiment in the works. I'm growing human food plants with as little trouble as possible. I'm trying to be kind of as lazy as possible. So I don't till the ground. I don't compost. I don't bury seeds in the ground very often. I am trying to work towards being able to surface sow most of the stuff in my garden, because you can get away with it for a lot of these small seeded stuff, brassicas, radishes, things like that. You can throw seeds on the ground and you get lucky. I'm combining this with full-on landrace seed saving. So that means that I save seed from everything that I grow, and I maintain a genetically diverse population in everything that I grow. So I may start with named varieties, right? That means cultivars of common food crops, but that when I save seeds, I am not purposefully not paying attention to what crosses with what, and then replanting and seeing, sort of in a survival of the fittest type situation, what will thrive. And so saving seed from the best plants, and repeating this every year. That's been my approach, and I like to buy new seeds. I'm especially excited to buy or acquire new seeds that have diverse genetic lineage. So other people who are working in a similar way, who are maintaining diverse populations. That's the kind of seed that I'm interested in getting. But yeah, so when you save all your seed, that doesn't mean that you can't buy, and right, you can still have fun looking at the catalogs. You can still participate in the things that were fun about gardening before, right? We're not trying to take anything away. And it's really interesting to buy seeds, grow out F2s of hybrid crops. Of course, the crops that are okay to buy or to use hybrids, there are certain crops that you don't want to use F1 hybrid seed on in landrace gardening, because it has cytoplasmic male sterility. Basically, they don't produce pollen, male pollen. And so I try to avoid that. And it's just a roll of the dice to see what happens. It's, I think, a very beautiful thing to behold, to see nature unfold before your eyes, to be working with nature, to not make an enemy of the weeds, right? But when you see a weed, you should be thinking to yourself, how can I get the foods that I grow to behave more like a weed? Because these have come here without me having to plant them. And there's a certain amount of seeds that are going to be in your soil regardless, right? You're never going to completely weed weeds out of your garden. If that's something that you commit to, that's going to be a lifelong pursuit. So will there ever not be any weeds? No. We see this even with chemical herbicides, right? It's this Roundup thing, it's on its way out. It's not working anymore. Drive down any commercial soybean field and you'll see what I mean. There are rogue Roundup resistant weeds all over the place in soybean fields. Anyway, so This is sort of the opposite approach. Here we are making a contract with nature, a new contract with nature, in which we ask nature to reveal certain things to us. Reveal to me what is the best version of this food plant that I want to have, so that I can eat, so that I can live peacefully and leisurely here on this earth. This is a question you can ask nature, and nature will respond to this question. I like to think of it as you're doing computation in nature, right? You're asking the question, what is the best version of this plant? This is by your standards, right? And we can choose for plants that are tall, or plants that are short, or plants that finish early, or plants that finish later. You can select for these things, right? By not knowing, without even knowing anything about genetics formally, right? If you maintain a genetically diverse population and just save seeds and replant seeds from the crops that you like and that did well, these problems will take care of themselves for you. And so that's sort of the Joseph Lofthouse and Raoul Robinson, who wrote Return to Resilience, which is a book that outlines sort of a similar thing in terms of pest control in particular. But I don't exercise any pest control. And stuff gets demolished sometimes, right? But I think at a certain level, you can accept that, some things are going to work and not work in your garden. And this also takes a lot of pressure off of you psychologically, because when you see a plant dying, right, and they sometimes do, fussy things like, Cucurbita maxima, which is something I would love to have lots of, but that is just not, has trouble, right, in the climate. And, when a seedling dies, right, take a look over here. Here are some, these are supposed maximas. But, when you see something struggling, it is maybe just a matter of it not being the right fit, not a good match for you in your garden, right? But because we're dealing in such wide genetic diversity, you're allowed to say that's okay. And you don't know what variety it was. You don't know, that was this or that, named cultivar. I basically grow things not as named cultivars, but by what breeds with what, basically what crosses with what. And that's about it. You can do, sweet corn versus dent corn. There's, things you can do within that if you want to separate that out. Sweet peppers versus hot peppers. But, essentially, that is how I roll here. And it's fun. I think there's some sort of good things about this. I had a total failure in my attempts to direct sow named variety, like heirloom style tomatoes over there. As you can see, it's all weeds. But that it ended up being okay. I think it's going to be okay because there are tomatoes all over the place, nonetheless. I've identified some that look like they're not just Matt's Wild Cherry. A version of cherry tomato that is almost an invasive species here in the garden. It's all over the place. Semi-wild, tastes really, really good, eaten fresh. And so this is also just a matter of tuning in your genetics to what your habits are, and you can be as lazy or as meticulous as you want to be. And so I guess that's the point, is that I'm trying to be as lazy as possible while getting as much out of it as I can. That's the basic idea. And so some ways of doing that are interplanting. This is Chinese cabbage interplanted with cucumbers. And the Chinese cabbage, is looking a little sad, and that's okay. It may bolt. That will also be interesting. But this is one that I ran a Grex of, genetics mix. And so, yeah, at the end of the day, I think of things as generic Chinese cabbage, generic melons. Let's take a look at those over here. Okay. So, I don't know. This is 300 different kinds of melons, maybe. And this is a patch, maybe about 4 by 4 feet. So we'll see what happens there. Growing some sweet corn over here. This is my grow out. This is a second or third generation of Lofthouse Astronomy Domine, which I think originally came from Indiana. So it's had an interesting voyage in its genetics. And as you can see, I did sort of push these into the ground, but I don't till here, and so I'm also probably inadvertently selecting for certain traits of plants that are good at that. Certainly the case over there where I'm surface sowing corn, which is something you just don't really do. Okay, here's a bunch of C. maxima. I'd say these are maybe 2 weeks old. And with this, I'm just trying to get as much seed as I can. I would say if each one of these pulls off one kabocha, and I believe that's what's going on here, that's about all I need. I want as much genetic diversity as possible. Not to have as many as possible. So yeah, anyway, there's that. We'll see what comes through for first frost. So planning a little late on this, but that's a common strategy in the South. I'm in Kentucky. Is it the South? Fight it out in the comments. But this is an area where it seems hard to grow maximas, and so it's a matter of tuning in the genetics. I think I want to get something that works really well, stores well, and tastes great, because eating kabocha, Japanese style pumpkin, is for me, that's a great one to grow, because when it works, it's easy. Because when a maxima takes, it really takes. So we'll see what happens with these. Anyway, this is my garden. It is a place where I do a lot of experimentation. Here's some teosinte, the ancient ancestor to corn. But experimentation, I think, is key. You want to be able to bend nature towards your will. And this can be accomplished by saving seed. I think if you think about it, right, this checks out. It's just a matter of how genetics works, right? And that's the great thing, is that you don't need to know anything about dominant or recessive traits, right? Except generally, Lofthouse says you should know that sometimes traits skip a generation, right? That's all you really need to know. And we're being very general about traits, so it's also not super necessary to hone in on these things. These are not often single genetic traits either, but sort of a symphony of lots of things happening, right? And no scientist can know why a landrace does well. We don't really have the computational power to do that sort of thing. But in nature, right, I do think that we are doing actual computation, as you would define computation. This is a subtle computation, but a computation nonetheless, where we are asking nature for the best version of a plant, and nature will answer your question. So in that sense, there is something very cool going on here, and it feels very exciting to be able to participate in this sort of dance with nature. I try to make it an elegant dance, one that's good for body and mind. Fukuoka is famous for saying, that the purpose of natural farming is not to necessarily perfect agriculture, but it's to perfect human beings. Right? We are living in a very strange time, and it's hard. It's hard to be alive right now in a lot of ways. And many of the reasons why it's so hard to be alive are due to our own foolishness, the decisions that have been made by our ancestors, the trauma we've inherited, perhaps epigenetically. And so we have to figure out how to live peacefully in the world, how to live not like psychopaths, right? And I mean, culturally, there's a problem. People like to think that there are technological solutions to problems. There are not always going to be technological solutions to cultural problems. And I think what we've got on our hands is a cultural problem. Not just in this country, in all countries. What is a country? A country is an abstraction. A country exists only in the minds of human beings. That's what I have to say about countries. So, how do we move forward? These are the kinds of questions I hope to be thinking about and discussing with you all. So, thanks for hanging out, and happy growing. If you save seed, you're going to end up with a lot of seed that you can use in any way you want. And so you can just throw seed around and get lots of volunteers. And that's one thing that I promote a lot here in the garden. And it's also just fun to see what unfolds, how much genetic diversity there is or isn't as you save seeds of these genetically diverse populations that you're growing. And so you want to think of it as a population. Think of this as a living, breathing thing that has co-evolved with your habits and your conditions. Co-evolved with your soil, with what exists underneath your soil. Imagine a whole world filled with an equal level of complexity, right, underground. As is in heaven, so is it in earth. That we can commune with the life that is underneath us in building up our ecosystem and promoting as much nature as possible. As much nature and human coevolution with nature as possible. How can we push human culture forward so that we can live peacefully and plentifully? Here's something you've maybe never seen. Direct seeded tobacco. So this is growing. Here's just kind of a, salad plus soybeans area that I sowed seed on, surface sowed. See, there's plenty of carrots, radishes of various sorts, kale, turnips, so all sorts of things. But here is tobacco. So I might sort of cut down some stuff here and see if I can get a little. This is going to be small plants, but it'll flower all the same, I'm sure. And that's one more year of genetics on the tobacco landrace. This seems to work. It just kind of comes in. The seed is tiny. Usually, you have to sow this tiny seed and plant out seedlings. But here it is, direct sown tobacco. It's July 22nd. Grown in sort of in the understory of a bunch of other stuff. So I may try chopping some of this down and seeing if I can get tobacco to flourish in this area. But yeah, I was surprised. I saw this the other day and I was like, a little bit of a eureka moment. Not that I do not smoke cigarettes or tobacco really, but I just think it's a cool plant. There's a quite mature, relatively, tobacco plant. You can see that bug is eating some kind of brassica. I think that's probably Chinese cabbage growing right next to it. But there's a very healthy looking tobacco plant. That's the other thing, is that if you've ever grown tobacco, you know that there's some, I don't know what it is. Its leaves are getting eaten though constantly when it's young, especially. But that does not really seem to be the case with this stuff. And yeah, if you just sort of cruising around in here, and yeah, seeing that there's some pretty healthy looking tobacco plants there. It's got one little nibble on it there, but so that's been very fun to see. So I would encourage you to take risks like that when you're throwing out seed, because you will get lucky and things will kind of work out the way you want them to when it finds, when these plants sort of find their niche. I was so worried that these soybeans were getting eaten, and they were on the lower parts, but I think the rabbits can't reach after a certain point, so I'm just continuing to select for what's going on in my garden. What goes on right now is rabbits were nibbling stuff. That's okay, right? You don't have to stress out when you see something. I instead think to myself, this is the plan unfolding. In the end, there's going to be a solution genetically. There will be something that has worked. It's pretty rare that you get nothing. Let me say that. And it may be, right, the first couple years you're growing stuff this way, it may be a little tricky, but it gets better. As you can see here, there's lots of things that just grow freely in the garden. Carrot, right, a notoriously tricky one, germinating just fine. A little bit of an underbrush, but that's going to come in right when it needs to. So that's good. I'm happy to see carrots. Carrots is one of the hardest, has traditionally been the hardest one for me to grow of the vegetable crops. But I think that it's just a matter of bombarding the soil with as many as you can. Get lucky, right? Seems like with carrots, the more you try, the less it works. And the more you just bombard your area, put carrot seed everywhere, and you'll have thousands of carrot seed when you save seed. Here's an example. Let me show you. If you're wondering how many carrot seeds you get from saving carrot seeds, each one of these is going to be, right? Each one of these is a seed here. And there's multiple flowers, tons of flowers, right? Just so how many seeds are there? How many chances do you get to get lucky in your garden by throwing this stuff down? That's essentially what we're asking. And the answer is you can actually get quite lucky, right? If you just bump up the odds, although the odds at first seem small, it's just a numbers game. The more seed you have, the luckier you're going to get. And you want it to be genetically diverse too, because you don't know what's going to work or why it's going to work. But you want there to be as wide of a genetic base as possible so that you get as many different chances as possible, right? If you were a betting man and you said, if we plant 1,000 of one particular variety of carrot seeds in this dude's lawn, and then we plant 1,000 genetically diverse carrot seeds in this dude's lawn, and we see which yields more carrots at the end of the game. I think we know what the answer would be. So that's generally how it works, right? You're wanting to just get as many different chances and opportunities for success in there, and genetic diversity is a big part of that. It's jazz, baby. If you like playing Stardew Valley, this is kind of like Stardew Valley. There are different challenges, but at the end of the day, you know, it's about how much attention you can pay and what works, what's the biggest sort of bang for the buck in terms of human action and its consequence on nature. And so I like to use the word elegant. I'm looking for elegant solutions to the problems of how to grow your own food. I want to be able to grow easily, and I want it to be fun. I want it to be joyous. This should be fun. It's a game, right? And humans are designed to be confronted with these kind of challenges, right? This is a mentally, I think, good space to be in as you engage with nature physically. And, you know, there's going to be, you know, some work that you do have to do, right? And to that, you know, to people who say it's a lot of work physically, you know, you do have to do things by hand. I would say you're going to have to do physical work anyway if you don't want to die. You're going to, if you're exercising already, if you're driving to a gym so that you can exercise, you know, I think we need to acknowledge that that's kind of an absurd way to live. And that's not your fault that you have to do that if you do that or whatever. But we're fundamentally, life is too kind of separated out into its constituent parts these days. And I think a good way to live physically and mentally is to engage with nature in a way that is not seeking to have sort of a psychotic level of control over every detail, but to observe nature unfolding, to learn from it, and to become a more grounded and mentally happy person through engaging with nature. And this is a really beautiful thing to be able to do, and I feel really blessed to be able to be out here working at the intersection between heaven and earth.